joining us this morning on Thursday. My name is Samantha Jackson. I work at the US Consulate in Melbourne. I'm also joined by Cora Lavin, my colleague from Sydney as well. We will be joining you for the next 90 minutes. We are really fortunate today to be joined by Elizabeth Thompson, who is with the NCAA Eligibility Center. I have been in my role for coming up nearly 10 years. And I've been working with Elizabeth entire career with the State Department so far. I know she's got a wealth of information that she's going to share with you tonight. After a little bit of housekeeping, what we're going to do, we're going to let Elizabeth get through her session. We'll open it up to a short Q&A. And then I'll also deliver some information as well so that you'll leave today's sessions with a whole lot of information and a whole lot of tips and a whole lot of guidance for you. So Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining tonight. Interestingly enough, I know I'm based in Melbourne, but I'm coming to you from about an hour and a half outside of Chicago en route to a US conference. And Elizabeth is joining us from Indianapolis. So Elizabeth, over to you, and thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you, Samantha, and thank you for everyone joining us today. As Samantha mentioned, I am with the NCAA Eligibility Center, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit today kind of about what the NCAA is, our process, getting registered with us, what courses you need to take in secondary school, grades 9 through 12, how you need to perform in those courses, and what those mean towards your eligibility to receive a scholarship or compete for an NCAA school. And then we'll wrap things up with timelines, recruiting, and some NCAA resources before I hand it off to Samantha, who will cover some Q&A and Education USA resources for you that you can utilize in country. So a little bit about the NCAA, or as some people refer to as the NCAA. So those terms are used interchangeably and both mean the same thing, same organization. So we are a sporting organization that oversees over almost 1,100 colleges and universities across the United States that are members of the NCAA. So we're made up into 3 divisions. Schools are categorized into Division I, II, or III schools. And so one of the interesting facts I like to tell students that aren't as familiar with the NCAA is that while Division I schools tend to be your largest or most kind of schools that make the most in the news or the media that you've heard about, things like your Stanfords, your Harvards, your Alabamas, your Floridas, et cetera, California schools, a lot of those larger schools are Division I programs, but the most schools that are made up of the NCAA actually are Division III schools with over 425 different colleges and universities that make up Division III. So this is just some statistics for you about the different divisions so that when you go to search which school is the best fit for you, you have a little bit more information. So for example, I attended a Division II school. Division II schools tend to be just a little smaller than Division I programs, but there's a lot more one-on-one or smaller class sizes that you may have versus in a Division I program, you may be one of up to 400 or more students in a lecture hall versus at Division II and Division III schools, some of your classes can be as small as 10 to 20 students in the class. So you get that much more one-on-one interaction with your professors in the college experience. The ratio of student athletes to students on campus is smaller as you go throughout the division. So if you're a student athlete at a Division I program, you may be only one of 23 students, and 1 in every 23 students might be a student athlete because they have upwards of 20 to 40,000 students enrolled at that university versus at a Division II or III school that might only have 4,000 or even as small as 1,000 or 2,000 students on campus. Every 1 in 7 or 1 in 5 students on campus might be a student athlete, and they might have the opportunity to play multiple sports. So there are a lot of benefits of Division II and Division III, as well as our Division I schools. These are the different sports that are offered at the NCAA level. We host 90 different championships across our 24 different sports that are offered. We'll be hosting our 91st championship starting next academic year as women's wrestling transitions from an emerging sport to a full championship sport. So the difference between the emerging sports and the championship sports are just sports that are up and coming. There have to be at least 40 different programs that offer that sport on campus in order for there to be competition across the division. So when a sport moves from an emerging sport to a championship sport, that is when we host a national championship across each division for that sport. So you can see all of the different sports that are offered here. If there's a sport that you're interested in, but that it may not be on this list here, it does not mean that there isn't still the opportunity to play that sport at one of our campuses. It just means that it's not governed by the NCAA and that we don't host the championship for it. So an example of that would be like men's rugby, for example, is not an NCAA sport, but there are many club or intramural sports across the NCAA schools that you could still play that in. It just means that the sports and the rule requirements are not governed by our association. It might be at a club level that those are governed. So that just means that you would not need to register or go through our process if it's a sport that's not listed here. We have a really great interactive map on our website that I would encourage you to look up and use to navigate. You'll see the different coded dots here in the different colors. Those represent our 3 different divisions. You can search on there by school, by sport, by program. So for example, if you're interested in studying international business and you want to be a women's swimming and diving student athlete at a Division I program, you can break the search down into division, into sport, and even the major that you wish to choose to study in school to find the schools that might be the best fit for you. So next I'll talk a little bit about the NCAA Eligibility Center, which is who I'm here on behalf of. So we're a unit within the NCAA National Office, and our role is to certify college-bound or university-bound student athletes for collegiate competition. So the purpose of those reviews, both an academic and an amateurism review, is to ensure fairness and equitable competition across all of our NCAA member schools. So every student athlete at a Division I program has to meet the same incoming academic requirements, regardless of which school you end up attending and competing for, to set those same minimum academic standards for equitable competition. This is a really great image that we like to share with student athletes so that they have an idea of what the entire process looks like, from sitting on this webinar today and learning about the NCAA clear through your journey to eventually arriving to an NCAA campus. So there are a lot of great hyperlinked resources within this image, but if you have your smartphones out, I encourage you to keep them out throughout this webinar. You can take a photo of this. We'll also have some QR codes for additional resources for you throughout this presentation, but you can kind of see step by step what this process is going to entail. You're starting with registering with the NCAA Eligibility Center, making sure that you're taking the right courses throughout grades 9 through 12 to be on track to be eligible. Throughout that time is when you would be recruited by one of our college coaches, and we'll talk more about that in this presentation, but that is a step in the process, as well as making sure you're on track each year to take the right classes. Once you become actively recruited by an NCAA coach, you can transition your NCAA account from that free profile page over to a certification account, which is what you would need to be actively recruited and to attend an NCAA school, having your transcript submitted, then applying to the schools that you're interested in. So we'll talk a little bit about how the application process is separate from the NCAA eligibility process, so being eligible to compete. You may be offered what's called a scholarship or an athletics agreement with an NCAA school, so you can sign for an athletics aid agreement with a school. You'll have to sign off on your sports participation, which is called requesting final amateurism. That will happen in year 12 for you, and we'll talk about that process. Then ultimately graduating secondary school, having your final transcripts and proof of graduation submitted to the NCAA, having your being certified by the NCAA, and that's a process that'll happen, receiving an I-20 from your NCAA school so that you can set up your appointment at the local embassy or consulate to be eventually issued your F1 student visa, which is what you would need to ultimately arrive to an NCAA campus. So lots of steps throughout the process. I think it's important to have a visual to see that these are all of the things that are going to be happening over your secondary school career and throughout the recruiting process, so that you know what to expect. So next we'll talk a little bit about the registration process. So this is an example of what our website looks like. The sport in the background changes from day to day, but you'll always know that if you see the Eligibility Center in the upper left-hand corner, and then the register button right there in the center, that's where you go to start your registration journey with us. We do have 3 different account types, and I'm going to talk to you today about what each of these account types do and which one would be the best fit for you. So the first one is our free profile page account. It's just that. It's free. There is no cost associated with it. We recommend students as young as year 6, year 7, or even year 8 in schooling can sign up for that because there is no cost associated with it. It's a way for you to get registered, get in our system. So you're receiving our newsletters, you're receiving updates to NCAA requirements. It's a way to stay on track and up to date with what's required in order to go on and play for an NCAA school. And so there's no better way to do that than to start early in the process and to be informed. And then once you become actively recruited by an NCAA coach, there's a button at the bottom of that free profile page that says transition your account. And that's when you can transition your free profile page over to our next account type, which is the certification account. And if you're watching today and you're already maybe in grade 11 or grade 12 and you're interested in going to an NCAA school, you don't have to start with the free profile page. You can jump right to the certification account that I'm going to talk about here. But if you have a profile page, you can click that transition button and that will transition you over to this account type, which is our academic and amateurism certification account. So this account type is required in order to go on a visit to a school, and we'll talk about what an official visit is in this presentation. But to sign a scholarship or athletics aid agreement with a school, you have to have this account type, and ultimately to be actively recruited and eventually certified and ending up playing for an NCAA school, you must have this account type. So there is a one-time $160 fee for international students. That's students who have attended school outside of the US. And there is a fee waiver opportunity there, and you can find more information on our website for those that might have a need-based that could meet that criteria for a fee waiver. And then lastly, we have our amateurism only certification account. This one is recommended for international student athletes who plan to attend a Division III school. And so the reason there is a separate account type for Division III schools is because Division III schools do not offer scholarships that are based on athletics. So you can have academic or merit-based scholarships, but Division III does not offer athletic scholarships, which is why you do not have to go through the Eligibility Center to be certified academically. So it's only an amateurism certification or athletics certification process that student athletes would have to go through. So that's why this account has a lesser fee of only $70. So if you know for sure you're going to a Division III school and you have no desire to look at Division I or Division II, you can go right to this account type. But if you want to keep all 3 divisions open, you can still do that academic and amateurism, that account type number 2, and that will certify you for all 3 divisions. But if you know specifically that you do want to go only Division III, this would be the account type for you. There's also a fee waiver option for this if you meet that criteria. And then any students that might be transferring down the road to a Division I or II program who maybe started at a 2-year school or started internationally, and their NCAA school only needs an amateurism certification and not an academic one, that would be this account type. So next we're going to start with some country-specific resources. So I mentioned earlier, if you have your smartphone, we'll have some QR codes. So we're going to start with some resources that we have for you that talks about how to find information specific for your territory in your country. So we have Australia broken down into several resources depending on which territory that you're from. So if you scan this QR code, this will take you to our landing page that has information on over 180 different countries broken up throughout the world. So if you at some point first attended school in New Zealand or in any other country and then moved to Australia, you can find those resources for those other countries in here as well. But for the purposes of today, if you scan the QR code, which took you to this website, you would then click on Oceania listed along the bottom there, and that would then take you to all of the options of all of the different territories within Australia. So for the purpose of this example image, I pulled up Queensland so you can see the same format would be there for all of the different territories. So this is going to give you a PDF with lots of different useful information that we'll be going throughout today's presentation on so that you understand how to use this. So the top section is background information. So what is the academic calendar year that we're looking at, the typical calendar? What is year 9 called within that country? Because it varies all throughout the world, but pretty standard in Australia as we see here in the States. Where's year 9 located? What native language are available, and you'll see why that's important in upcoming information. What is the timeline expected for students for graduation? That's also another important piece because we're going to talk about delayed enrollment and what that means, especially coming from a country that is on the Southern Hemisphere academic calendar year, which differs from the US. So in the US, we're on a August or September is when we typically start the school year, and it typically runs until May or June. For college purposes, it's typically the very end of August through the very beginning of May is the standard school year for our universities, but that can vary. So it's important to know that because we're going to talk about your gap years and your grace periods for your sport, and that's going to be based on your expected date of graduation, which for students from Australia is 12 years or 4 years from the initial start of year 9, so 9, 10, 11, 12, and then you have a December graduation date based on the academic calendar of your country. Other information that you can find in these PDFs are what is acceptable forms of proof of graduation, which you have to have in order to be eligible to compete for an NCAA school, what are crediting policies, which is standard throughout Australia, and I'll talk about that in this presentation. You can also find the grading scale for each territory, which does vary, so that's where you would find that, and we'll talk about how to convert those to an NCAA GPA, grade point average. All of this is information that you can find in there, as well as course titles, which we're going to talk about here next, that might be specific to your territory. We'll talk about those. So when we look at NCAA eligibility, we're going to be looking for 16 core courses, and we'll talk about those breakdowns in a minute. But before you can determine if you meet those 16 core courses, you need to know what a core course is. So if you scan this QR code, that will take you to our core courses for international student athletes, and I'm going to walk you through how to use that resource. So these are the subject areas that we are looking at when we are evaluating a student to determine if they meet academic eligibility. So we're going to look at your semester by semester transcripts for grade 9, 10, 11, and 12. And each semester, we're going to look at your course titles and the final grade earned to determine if you meet the 16 core course requirements. So a core course is defined as a subject in one of the areas that you see on the booklets here on your screen. And the reason that these core areas are focused on is based on what is standard curriculum for higher education in the United States. And the data and research shows that students that have the 16 core that we'll talk about here in just a moment are set up for success at first year of university, of successfully being able to complete that year, and then obviously getting the support that they need on campus with tutors and academic advisors to go on to graduation. So it's our job and importance to make sure that we're setting you up for success at the collegiate level to make sure that you are academically prepared. And so that data and research shows that these subject areas are what are going to set you up for success at US curriculum in a US higher education institution. So we're looking at subjects such as English and or native language, if there was a native language listed for your country, mathematics at the Algebra 1 level or higher. We'll talk about how to figure that out on your transcripts. Sciences, so natural or physical sciences, things like biology, chemistry, physics, earth science, even marine sciences can count in parts of Australia, and I'll show you where to find that. Social sciences, those are things like your history, government, economics, psychology, all of those are social sciences. Law is another example of that. Any world languages or foreign languages can count. Comparative religions, so those are things such as a world religion course that does not focus on any specific doctrine or religion that it's taught through, but just a general comprehensive overview of all world religions comparatively would be an example. And then philosophy courses that are not specific to one study of philosophy. So for example, ethics may not count, but a philosophy course would count, titled philosophy. So all of those information can be found throughout that course title usage guide as to what counts or what doesn't. But the first step when determining if a course title can be used or not is to see if it's taken in grades 9 through 12, and then to check the PDF for your territory. So this is an example from the PDF from New South Wales. So if you're from New South Wales, the first thing that you would do is pull up your transcript, pull up the PDF for New South Wales, and then scroll down to the important information section. And this is what that would look like. You would see one chart that has approved courses, and then a list if there were any courses that have been reviewed and not approved. So for example, if you took general mathematics in grade 10 or grade 11, or if your transcript just said mathematics 10 or math extension 1 or 2, those are approved math courses for your territory. And if we saw those on the transcript, we would use those. And then another example would be commerce or physical education. If that's on your transcript, we have reviewed those and the curriculum does not meet NCAA core course requirements, so those cannot be used. But if you have a subject that you don't see on the approved chart or the not approved chart, for example, for New South Wales, then the next step would be to go back to that course title usage guide and run the course through there to determine if it can be used. So there is a chart for courses that are not approved, and there is a chart for courses that are approved. So for example, if you took Applied English 9, if we go back for a second, Applied English 9 was not on the approved chart. It was also not on the not approved list, which means we would then use this chart. And the first section of this chart has any titles that use anything in that first box under AI. If you see any of those words in the course title, that means that they cannot be used. So an applied English or a basic English 9, if it's not approved specifically for your territory or country, then that means it has to be, have to use this guide. And if this guide said that that word means no, then that means it would not be used. Same thing goes for areas that are not considered core courses. So say you had a course that didn't have the word basic or applied or begin in it. Maybe you just took astrology. Okay, so it makes it through the first chart because there are no words that level it down like a basic. So you get to the second chart and you see something like astrology or design, those are on the second no chart. And because the title has a word that is on there, that means that that course cannot be used. But if you had a course like English 9, so we did not see English 9 on the list for New South Wales here as the approved or denied. We made it through the first two charts on the course title usage guide. It didn't have any of the words that were no. So then the next step would tell you to go to the approved list. So I know this is kind of small for the purposes of today, but I wanted to make sure I had a good example to show you here. And you would see English is in the first chart on the left as an approved title. So if you had English 9, English 10, English 11, if you had, Australian English 9, none of those words are stopping it on the first two charts. So that means that it would be an approved title. Same thing for mathematics. If you took Math 9, Math 10, Math 11, math is on that approved chart that you see under math on the right-hand side. So that would be an approved course. But if you saw a essentials mathematics and that wasn't approved for your territory, or a basic mathematics, that word that we saw on that first chart is what would make it, because of the level, not approved. But if there aren't any of those no words and it's over here on this list, that means that we can use it. So things like marine science, meteorology, natural science, oceanography, physics, science 9, science Science 10, Science 11, etc. These are all examples of courses that if they're on your transcript with a course and a grade, that we would be able to use those in your academic certification. So that's just kind of a way for you to understand what courses are going to count as core courses and what would not count as core courses. And then lastly would be the crediting policy. So once you know whether or not the subject can be used towards your core course requirement, then you need to know how much credit to award the course towards the 16 requirements. So in Australia, the standard crediting for all territories within Australia is that each core course gets 0.5 credits per semester. So if you studied English 9, semester 1, and semester 2, that means you would get a half a credit for the first semester and a half a credit for the second semester. The most any course in any subject can receive is 1 full credit. So the most English 9 would ever get is 1 credit total, or 0.5 per semester. But the same thing if you studied math, if you studied science, if you studied social science, all of those subjects, you would get a half a credit each for those per semester. So next I'm going to talk briefly about the grade point average, and then we'll kind of tie all three of these things together. So the US typically operates on a 4.0 grading scale, and that the NCAA does as well. So an A grade is worth a 4 out of 4. So if you have the best grade possible, that means you have a 4.0 GPA, which is a perfect grade point average. The next down is a B, which is a 3.0, a C, which is a 2.0, a D, a 1.0, and then failures are worth nothing, which would not help your GPA. And that's a good point to make, is that if you failed a course for a semester, you would not get a half a credit. You have to actually pass the course in order to receive any credit for the course. So here is an example of the grading scale for Western Australia. So if you see there in the middle, if they offer an alpha grade or if they use a descriptor grade such as excellent, high achievement, sound achievement, etc., or if there is a numeric grade, 75 to 100 being an A. So these are the 3 typical grading scales that we see for Western Australia. So if you had an English 9 for a grade of a 75 from Western Australia, that would mean English 9 received a grade of an A, which is worth 4 quality points. So if you got 75 to 100 in all of your courses, that would mean you would have a 4.0 GPA for the US system and in the NCAA eligibility for your grade point average. So if you still have those smartphones out, you can scan this QR code as well. This takes you to our Division I and Division II worksheet, and that's where you would take everything that we just learned as far as choosing the right course, determining how much credit it's worth, and then what NCAA equivalent grade that it has in order to plug all of those things in to determine your GPA for NCAA purposes and if you're on track to meet those 16 core courses. So here's an example of what that worksheet looks like. You see here, English 10 received 1 credit or half a credit per semester, and it had a grade of an A, which means you would put a 4 into the grade because A's are 4s, and then you multiply the credit by the grade in order to calculate the GPA. So next, we're going to talk about the certification outcomes for Division I and II. And as I mentioned earlier, because Division III does not offer sports scholarships, everything is merit-based. There are not Division III academic requirements. So there are 4 possible outcomes for Division I, and we'll talk about those next. So an early academic qualifier is when we would look at your transcript for years 9, 10, and 11. So if you completed 14 of the 16 required core courses on your transcripts from grades 9 through 11 and had an NCAA GPA of a 3.0 or higher on that 4.0 scale, then that would make you an early academic qualifier, which is great. Coaches love that because it helps them in the recruiting process know the outcome of your eligibility even sooner versus other students that would have to wait until graduation, their final graduation certificates being issued, then submitting those to the NCAA and then waiting for their certification, which can oftentimes, if you're graduating in December and a school is trying to bring you to arrive at their campus in January and maybe your leaving certificate doesn't come out until the first week in January, that can be a very tight turnaround. So doing really well academically in your classes, and potentially being an early academic qualifier is only going to set you up for success and make this process even easier and a smoother transition to you. And just remove that stress in your senior year of wondering whether or not you're going to be eligible. So as a early academic qualifier, as I mentioned, you're eligible for that scholarship, or what we refer to as athletics aid, and then to practice and compete for your school. This is the subject area breakdown as to what, I'm sorry, for early academic qualifier, where those credits have to be. So 3 credits of English or native language, 2 credits of math, 2 science, 2 extra credits of English, math, or science, and then 5 additional credits, which can be from any of those subject areas, as well as world religion or the comparative religion philosophy as well. So next we'll talk about a Division I qualifier. So a qualifier is defined as someone who is immediately eligible for athletics aid, practice, and competition. So this looks at all 4 years, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So if by the end of grade 12, you have earned 16 core courses and you have a 2.3 or higher GPA in those 16 core courses in the required area, that would make you a Division I qualifier. And so this is the breakdown as to where those 16 core courses have to be. So you see they're just slightly different than the 14 that you saw earlier. And then a Division I academic redshirt. So say something happens where you were not able to get the 2.3 GPA, but maybe you got a 2.0 or a 2.1 or a 2.2, anything between a 2.0 or higher, but under a 2.3 would mean that you could be an academic redshirt. And an academic redshirt means that you are able to receive your scholarship and practice in the first term, but you're not able to compete your first year at an NCAA school. So that's what redshirting is referred to. And then if you perform well in your first term, you can go on to continue to practice. And the NCAA school recruiting you will talk to you about that. So say the first term at that school was the first semester. And if you earned a high enough GPA and enough credit hours at the NCAA school in that first term, then you could go ahead and continue to compete in the second term as well, or semester 2. But it's just in your first academic year at the university, you would not be eligible to compete as an academic redshirt. And then the last outcome for Division I is a non-qualifier. We don't want this to be the outcome for any of you. So this is why we hope you're joining us here today to learn about NCAA academic requirements. But a Division I non-qualifier is defined as someone who did not meet those 16 core courses or the GPA requirements. And as a non-qualifier, you would not be eligible to receive a scholarship or athletics aid, to practice, or to compete during your first year of full-time enrollment at an NCAA school. So if that is the unfortunate outcome, you would want to work with the compliance office at the NCAA school to discuss what next steps or options might be available for you. So next we'll talk about Division II. Division II has 3 possible outcomes, and I'll explain why in just a minute. So Division II also has an early academic qualifier. You also need 14 core courses to be an early academic qualifier. The GPA is just slightly different. So we talked about earlier for Division I, it being a 3.0 in those 14 core courses. Division II requires a 2.5 grade point average in those core courses in order to be an early academic qualifier. That again is looking at just years 9, 10, and 11. But if you meet those requirements, then you would be immediately eligible for scholarship, practice, and competition at a Division II program. This is the subject area breakdown of the requirements of those 14 core courses for an early academic qualifier. And then Division II full qualifier. So if you remember earlier, we talked about Division I requiring a 2.3 to be a full qualifier. Division II is just slightly different with a 2.2 core course GPA. I always tell students, if you aim for Division I eligibility, by default, you will be Division II eligible as well. So if it seems overwhelming to try to remember all these different GPAs, if you just aim for Division I full qualifier eligibility, then by default, you would be eligible for Division II as well. But a Division II qualifier is defined as simply the same as Division I. You'd be immediately eligible for athletics aid, practice, and competition. Do have to have those 16 core courses and looking at years 9 through 12 and a GPA or a grade point average in those 16 core courses of a 2.2 or higher on the 4.0 NCAA scale. This is the breakdown of those subject areas for Division II. But again, if you aim for the Division I ones, by default, you would meet the breakdown for Division II requirements as well. And then this is one of the pieces about Division II that I am proud of as a Division II graduate and think is a wonderful thing that Division II made the change of. So just a few years ago, Division II changed to removing the non-qualifier status. And so partial qualifier is available to all students who are admitted to and enroll at a Division II program. So what that does is that gives more access to scholarship money and opportunities at higher education for student athletes. So we understand that life happens and things happen that may result in a detrimental impact towards your academics that may have resulted in you not being a qualifier for Division I or Division II. So just keep in mind that if something happened where you were not a qualifier for Division I or Division II, by default, Division II says that you would have access to practice with your team and to receive your scholarship in the first year as a partial qualifier. So you would want to work with your Division II school. You would not be able to compete in any competitions your first year at the NCAA school, but you would be eligible if the school still offers it to receive your scholarship and practice with your team. So if you scan this QR code, this takes you to the initial eligibility flyer, which goes over everything that I covered in the academic requirements here in the presentation for Division I and Division II, all on a one-page resource for you. And then, as I mentioned throughout this presentation, while Division III schools do set their own academic standards on campus, we do certify the amateur status of Division III international student athletes. So just a reminder that if you do choose a Division III program, that you would need to create that amateurism only account so that we can certify you as eligible to compete. And while we may not be reviewing your academics, we may still require your academic records to establish your timeline for graduation, which does play a factor into your amateurism certification and your number of seasons of competition at the Division I, II, or III level. And I'll talk about that in an upcoming portion of this presentation. So I also just want to take a moment to any students that might have an education impacting disability. So what we refer to those as here in the US. So that's defined as any current impairment that has a substantial educational impact on a student's academic performance and requires accommodation. So if you receive accommodations at your secondary school for an education impacting disability, then you may be eligible for accommodations with the NCAA. You can find more information about this on our website on.ncaa.com/EID. So what those accommodations are, just so that you are aware, is Division I, if you graduate on time with your class, would allow you to take up to 3 additional core course credits as long as you graduate on time from high school and you complete those 3 credits prior to full-time collegiate enrollment. So if something happened at the end of grade 12 where you only had, say, 13 core courses and you still needed to get 3 more, but you did graduated on time in December, you aren't looking to enroll at an NCAA school until the following August, you could utilize that time between there to take up to 3 additional classes for Division I to get you towards that full eligibility status. So again, more information on our website. Division II does not have the limitation as to having to complete the courses by graduation. So Division II says that we will look at everything up till full-time collegiate enrollment or full-time university enrollment anywhere in the world. So if you're taking time off between high school graduation and enrolling and need to take more courses to get Division II eligible, Division II does allow for that. So next we're going to talk about delayed enrollment, reclassifying, and the impact that that can have, especially coming from a country that operates on the Southern Hemisphere. So for Division I, as I mentioned, only core courses that are completed in those first 8 semesters from your initial start in ninth grade can be used in your academic certification. So that means if you did ninth grade, then you reclassed or repeated ninth grade, and then went on and did 10th, 11th, and 12th. That's 5 years of schooling from ninth grade. And so NCAA rules for Division I can only look at the first four, which means we would look at ninth grade, 10th grade, and 11th grade for you towards your Division I eligibility. And there may be issues if you repeated courses in that repeated ninth grade that we can only use the better grade for that. So if you took English 9 and got a D, and then took it again in your repeated year and got an A, we would use the A, but the maximum amount of credit that you would get for a repeated course would still just be 1 credit. So that means that English 9, you would only have 1 credit of it for an A, and not 1 credit for a D and 1 credit for an A. So that's why I want to point that out, because that is important to know, that the courses might be duplicative, that could be an issue, as well as what we'll talk about next, which is delayed enrollment. So if you did repeat a year of high school, that may have used your gap period or your grace period for your sport, and we'll talk about what those are here on the next slide. So we have a couple of resources available on our website that address delayed enrollment, but generally speaking, most sports have a 1 year gap period, with the exceptions that you see there on the left for men's and women's tennis. At the Division I level, has only a 6-month grace period, and we'll talk about what that means in a moment. Division I and II men's ice hockey has Division I has a 21st birthday. Division II has a 3-year grace period for the sport, and then men's and women's skiing is 21st birthday for Division I, which just means all of these things mean that you have to enroll full-time or stop competing prior to that birthday. But for Division I men's and women's tennis, that grace period means you could continue to compete in your sport for 6 months after graduation. After that, you could begin losing seasons of competition at the NCAA level. But all other sports, such as swimming, track and field, etc., football, soccer, all of those operate under a 12-month or 1 year grace period, or what is also referred to as a gap year for that sport. So we'll talk next about how those apply. So we're going to use the example of a student who graduates on time in December of 2024. And remember, we talked about on time meaning no delays, no repeats. So you went 9, 10, 11, 12, and then graduated on time with your class this past December in 2024. So for example, if the sport was Division I water polo, that would fall under the grace period or gap year of 1 year. So that would mean that that student's gap year would end in December of 2025. There is, on the resource, you will find that that can be extended to the last day of February of 2026, which would be the end of the first opportunity to enroll at an NCAA school. Essentially, if you did not enroll anywhere full-time in college or university from graduation to December of 2024, clear through the last day of February of 2026, then anything that you do starting March 1st of 2026 and after will trigger the loss of a season of competition at the NCAA Division I level. So what that means is all student athletes have a 5-year clock for a number of seasons, a 5-year clock from when you first enroll at an NCAA school. And within that 5-year clock, you can use 4 seasons. So if you played in March and in April of 2026, but did not enroll until the fall of 2026, you still have a 5-year clock, but you may now only have 3 seasons to use at the NCAA level. So that's how that applies in the process. And the point, again, is to ensure fairness and equity in the competition at our NCAA member schools, because continuing to compete and train beyond your gap year for your sport from graduation would be giving you a competitive advantage over other students. So that's the intent behind those rules as to how and why that applies. So just make sure that you're doing your research as to what your gap period is for your sport, what that could mean with your division. So I mentioned earlier that Division I has a 5-year clock to use 4 seasons of competition. Division II is slightly different. So Division II, which I will talk about, has a clock, but the clock can start and can stop. So say you enrolled full-time in university for 1 year, but then you took a year off and then you came back. So that clock can stop and then restart to where you would still have 4 years on that clock. And then depending on whether or not you used a season to use it. So it's essentially a 10-semester clock or 5-year clock for Division II that can start and stop, but Division I's is different, which means the second you full-time enroll as a student at the college or university level, that clock starts and it does not stop. So if you enrolled in the fall, this upcoming fall of 2025, then 25, 26, 26, 27, 27, 28, 28, 29, 29, 30. So at the end of the 29-30 academic year, your clock is done for Division I. Even if you started for 2 months, withdrew from school, and never went back, your clock is still running. And after the end of that 29-30 season, you have no eligibility left at the Division I level. But at Division II, if you started that clock, but for whatever reason had to withdraw, take time off school, you could come back to Division II and still have those 4 years on that clock remaining. So those are some of the major differences between Division I and Division II with seasons of competition. So next we're going to briefly talk about the recruiting process. So I know we're getting close on time. Samantha, are we doing okay? Okay. I just want to make sure that I was cover everything. So we want to talk about recruiting next. So all of the things that you see on this slide mean that you're being actively recruited by an NCAA coach. So if you get WhatsApp messages or text messages or direct messages on social media, emails, phone calls, if they come to evaluate or watch you play your sport, if they visit your school, which could happen, if they offer you a scholarship in writing or what we call an athletics aid agreement or financial aid offer, or if they're offering to fly you and potentially you and some of your family to come visit their campus or university, all of those things mean that you are being actively recruited. It can start as early as year 9 with sending you recruiting materials through the mail, but in most cases, recruiting starts the summer after grade 10 or the start of grade 11. And then another piece that's important to know is what's called an an institutional request list. This is something that in the recruiting process, the NCAA coach will ask you for your 10-digit NCAA ID number, which you're given at the registration process. So when you create your NCAA account, any of the 3 accounts that I covered, you're assigned a 10-digit ID number that you can find in the upper right-hand corner of your account. You'll also be emailed that. That's what you can give to coaches in order to have you be placed on their school's request list. So I mentioned earlier that recruiting can happen in all different ways. It also can happen at all different times of the year because there are rules around when coaches are allowed to recruit. So this is a really great resource that I won't spend a lot of time on, but you will just want to do the research to find out what is the recruiting calendar for your sport, because it varies by sport and division. So there may be a time period that if you're like, I'm not hearing from any coaches, it might be a time of year that they are not allowed to recruit, what is referred to as a recruiting shutdown, versus quiet periods, dead periods, contact periods. All of that information you can find on our recruiting calendar here. So I'll leave this slide up for just a second so that you can access information on our recruiting calendars. So I mentioned this earlier in the presentation, but there are 2 different types of visits that can occur to an NCAA school. One is called an official visit, and the other one is an unofficial visit. Official visits are visits that are being paid for by the NCAA school for you to come and visit that school. So in order to take an official visit, you must first be registered with the NCAA Eligibility Center. Second, you must be on that school's institutional request list, which the school will take care of once they're given your ID number with the NCAA. And then we have to have your transcript. So the school and us must have your high school transcript for grades 9 and up in order for you to make that visit. And then for an unofficial visit, that is just if you happen to be coming over to the States and you and your family choose to take a visit to a NCAA school, the NCAA school is not paying for it. That's what's considered an unofficial visit. There's lots of different things that can be offered in an official visit per division. So if you are offered something at a Division I school visit that you're maybe not offered at a Division II or Division III, it's not that one of those divisions likes you more than the other division. It's just that the rules vary. So if one division is offering to pay for your meals while another one isn't, it may be because they're not allowed to. So just keep that in mind throughout the recruiting process, that this is going to look and feel different for every school, or depending on the division level that they're a part of. The same thing goes for unofficial visits. If you happen to be over visiting schools and have the means to do so, and it's an unofficial visit, and maybe a Division II school offers to pay for a meal for you and your family while you're there, but a Division I doesn't, that's because the rules are different for Division II, where they allow for that, versus a Division I school is not allowed to provide complimentary meals in an unofficial visit. So just important things to know throughout the recruiting process of visits. These are some suggested topics that you should discuss with the NCAA coaches in the recruiting process, so that there are realistic expectations for you and your family in that time once you arrive to the school. So a lot of times students think, well, I was a top athlete in my country, so I assume wherever I go, I'm going to start for that program. But you might be competing against students from 50 different countries as well as across the US. And maybe that coach had in their mind that you were going to redshirt your first year, which just means practice and receive your scholarship, but they didn't have any intention for you to play any games or competitions in that first year. If you had in your mind that you would be playing every game and the coach had in their mind that you wouldn't be playing any games, that could really impact your experience in the first year at that program. So that's an important question to ask. What are the time demands? How much do you expect me to play? What resources are available? What happens if I am being recruited and something happens where I am injured? Is there a rehabilitation process? Is there the ability to get that year back? So these are all important questions for you to ask the coaches and the university team that you have access to in that recruiting process. And there's more suggestions on our website at on.ncaa.com/choosing. And again, many of the things I just mentioned on the last slide are also here on this slide, which are just some recruiting best practices, talking with the support system around you, utilizing Education USA, who has very extensive experience in this. Even Samantha, as a former student athlete herself, is a great resource that she can talk to you about what her experience was like. And they have helped many students from Australia go through this process, so they know firsthand some of the experiences that they've seen and things that you should look out for, utilizing their resources as well as the resources on our website to talk to that support system around you as to what is going to be the best fit for you. And then the last piece I like to tell student athletes about is being mindful of how you conduct yourself in a positive manner, both in the class, practices, and games at home, in your community, and most importantly, online. So these coaches are investing multiple hundreds of thousands of US dollars in you in the recruiting process through scholarships, through all of that. And their jobs are on the line as coaches, but also the reputation of their universities are on the line based on who they're recruiting and who is on their team and their program. So if coaches first I can tell you every coach I've ever worked with first does their research online to figure out what's out there about the student. And if it's someone that they feel is going to be a risk to the integrity or the reputation of their university, that's going to make them not want to recruit a student. And then the second piece is that oftentimes coaches will reach out to a school counselor or a teacher or a coach to first get an idea of what type of student they are, what are they attending class, because attending class is mandatory in the US at our universities. You'll find that the coaches often, their assistants or their grad assistants go around and take attendance, because how you perform in your classes at the NCAA schools determine whether or not that team can play in the postseason and whether or not you can get your scholarship for the next year. So if you aren't going to class and if you aren't getting the grades, that means the whole team could potentially not play in the postseason, or the reduction in scholarship amounts if you're not meeting your progress towards degree, which is another requirement that could impact the coach. So all of these things integrate academics into higher education here in the US and are extremely important. So just know that how you conduct yourself academically at your school in your country will be a reflection on how that recruiting process goes for you. It is extremely important. And then there's a bit of information that you can find on our website pertaining to name, image, and likeness. There are challenges that international student athletes often face due to US F1 visa regulations, which limit the ability to earn active income as an international student here in the States. So I always just tell student athletes, visit our website for more information on name, image, and likeness. And then if you have the ability to, in the recruiting process, ask these colleges and universities if they have an immigration attorney that they use on campus, if they have best practices for international student athletes to be able to partake in name, image, and likeness. These are questions that you should ask in the recruiting practice, as they vary from school to school depending on their program. And then just a reminder that an athletics aid is something that you can sign with the school. It is not required. It is a voluntary process, but it does kind of tie you to that school for one academic year. So if you sign for a school, that's typically the time period, but you can find more information about athletics aid agreements on our website and our NCAA rules. We also have a transfer guide if anyone joining us today is a transfer student, so that you can find that information. All international students are considered four-year transfers. So the 4-4 transfer guide would be the guide that you would use if you are looking to enroll from an international university to an NCAA school. So then with that, I'm going to wrap up with some resources. If you have questions after today, you can visit our website. You can also connect with the Eligibility Center via our customer service contact form. That's what that QR code will take you to. And you can also visit any of our social media platforms. I would encourage you, whatever your social media of choice is, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, now known as X, follow us on there. You'll see all the handles listed there at the bottom. This is an ever-changing landscape in college athletics right now in the United States, so rules may be updated and changed in the future, as well as requirements. So please be sure to follow us on social media, as well as download our International Student Athlete Handbook. It's a really great resource that will walk you through all of the things to expect once you arrive to campus. So what to expect when it comes to taxes, cultural differences, food, shopping, finances, budget, culture on campus versus off campus. Sometimes schools have religious affiliations and what those mean. So all of that is something that's really great for you to download, as well as I mentioned earlier, our guide to international academic standards. You can also scan our QR codes that will take you direct to our social media handles here, where you can follow us on any of those social media platforms. And then the last slide I have after this, Samantha, is just how they can contact us with our short survey and our email address. So if you want, we can go ahead and open it up to any questions or whatever you have next for us.
So Elizabeth, I'm going to lead through a couple of questions, and thank you for the presentation. I know it's incredibly thorough. So I'm sure people joining us tonight, their head is spinning a little bit. But the more you listen to this, we will have a recording. You'll be able to review the recording as well. The more it's going to make things a whole lot easier. I think what's also important to know for parents and families and students that want to be recruited tonight, actually this morning, is that you think that the process is just hard for Australians or an international student, the process is just as challenging for an American student as well. So please know that, it's only an international student going through the process. It is just as challenging for an American going through the process. I know there's a couple of parents and a couple of chats through the sidebar through your presentation, Elizabeth, about the NCAA 16 core courses. Again, physical education, business management. They've been reviewed on a number of occasions. They're not going to be reviewed again. They are going to remain non-core. And remembering, parents, when a student starts in year 9, they're doing about 28 to 30 subjects. So you can always find generally your 16 core. Remembering that once you do 4 years of English, English year 9, English year 10, English year 11, English year 12, that is 4 of the 16 done. So then it becomes a whole lot more simpler to do that. But if there are subjects that need to be approved or reviewed by the NCAA, they are happy to do that. For instance, the NCAA and Elizabeth and her team reviewed nutrition in South Australia about 3 years ago, and now that is now a physical science for South Australian residents. For people in Victoria and also South Australia doing general math, the word general on its usage in the course title code will have that denied. So because of course title, that has been approved once it's on anyone's transcript from South Australia or Victoria, as an example. So if you think there are subjects that should be reviewed, then the NCAA team are happy to review them. I would touch bases with Cora and I first, because we can probably give you some background. And the NCAA eligibility team is a fantastic team, but they're a small team. And we don't want to inundate them with requests from our region when we know it's already been reviewed. But please talk to us or through your school counsellors in that regard. The other thing I want you to address, Elizabeth, that I think is really interesting, we're obviously in school holidays right now. So if you don't have a free profile account set up with the NCAA, I suggest you do it. It will take about 45 minutes. Elizabeth, I'm under the understanding that I always tell parents and students to keep your $160 until the end of sort of year 11, because nothing can happen from the NCAA eligibility office for early review until that time period. Is that what you recommend, or do you have other thoughts regarding that?
Always tell students not until the active recruiting process has happened, because even though they cannot have a review done until the end of grade 11, meaning, so we do a preliminary evaluation looking at your transcripts for 9, 10, and 11, and then we would do another evaluation upon secondary school graduation. But once students are in the active recruiting process, that's when I encourage you to transition that over, because then you know that this process is going to come to fruition and you can get the information in on file with us. Schools can activate you in our system so that the official visits could potentially happen, the offer of aid agreements. So if you know it's going to happen, I would encourage it's once that active recruiting process happens, which can start at the beginning of grade 11 for many students.
Perfect. The other thing I was going to also mention, and that you also addressed, Elizabeth, is that they have a wonderful online contact form. That if you ever have questions, use the contact form that goes through the Eligibility Center, and they are happy to respond to any of those questions. Their goal is to make you eligible. Their goal is to not make you ineligible. So never fear that your questions are going to hinder your recruitment, because they have nothing to do with the relationship with the coaches. They're just doing the eligibility component. Do you want to add to that, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I would just say, and I'll go back to the slide that has our contact information on it. It's that QR code right there that says connect with the Eligibility Center. So we have a really great customer service team, and their goal is to get you eligible for every division and to make sure that you're on track to be eligible. And as Samantha said, like, we don't work with the coaches or the recruiting process. Coaches actually don't even have access to viewing your information in the NCAA Eligibility Center. So think of it as you have to get a certification to compete within the NCAA. And so our job is to get you that certification. And we work with what's called a compliance office at each of our schools to the athletic department. The recruiting process is entirely separate. So another common question that we get is like, well, where do I upload my times, or, you know, how I've done in my sport so that coaches can see that? That's not what this is for. This is not a recruiting website. This is not a recruiting profile. profile. It's not a recruiting certification. Coaches do not have access to viewing anything in here. You don't put anything about height or weight or time or anything. It is academics that we're looking at. And then we're ensuring that you're an amateur, meaning not a professionalized or not competed outside of that gap year. So what we're looking at is purely to ensure the fairness and equity of all students competing at the NCAA level, and it has nothing to do with the recruiting process other than what is required from a compliance perspective for campuses to bring you on a visit, to follow rules is all that is. So just know that that does not play into this, that our role here is to get you eligible so that every opportunity is available for you at all NCAA schools.
So, Robin, we're going to let you ask your question in 1 second. I've got one final question to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, one of the things I was going to mention is that sending your transcripts to the NCAA Eligibility Center at the end of each year, at the end of year 9, at the end of year 10, at the end of year 11 is really a positive, good framework to do. If you have not engaged with Cora and I, what you're intending to do is sending 100 pages of transcripts to the NCAA Eligibility Center, inevitably also the coach that wants to recruit you. Please don't do that. We highly encourage you to work with your schools and create a 1 to 2 page template that is signed off by the school as an official source of documentation. And that is all that the NCAA needs to see and review. And eventually, if you're recruited, then the institutions need to see the 100 pages. But we highly encourage you to do a summary document with your school. And if you need some assistance with that, then please reach out to Cora and I. And we can certainly help with that as well. But Elizabeth, I'm sure you've seen lots of transcripts and lots of formats, and you probably know which families are coming through EducationUSA offices.
Absolutely. So this is my 16th year of doing this, and I have hand processed, large packets of Australian transcripts, as well as those 1 to 2 page resources. I also encourage you'll get an email when you register with us that's a welcome email and how to submit your documents, which will have the email address and all of the information. Your school can email those directly to us. It does have to come from a school email address directly to the NCAA, but you'll get that in your welcome registration. If you also go to our website and click on the additional information section for international students, there's a document submission breakdown there. You'd have them put your NCAA ID number in the subject line of the email, but the schools could email your transcripts directly to ec-processing@ncaa.org, and that will get them directly into your NCAA account, which is the fastest and most efficient way.
And Robin, I'm going to ask you to bring yourself off mute, and if you can ask your question, that would be great. And while we do that, Elizabeth, if you can stop sharing your screen, and I will start sharing my screen, and we'll do a handover. And then while we do the handover, Cora, can you just make sure that we've got all the initial first questions? And then I think Elizabeth is kindly going to stay with us until the end of the session, so we'll have some other questions come up as well.
Hey, thank you so much, Elizabeth. That's amazing. I've learned so much. And Samantha, thank you very much for organising this. Quick question, and it's probably more on that sporting side, because I know NCAA is very much about the academic, and I've got that from this session. From a sporting side, what's the bare minimum, for a coach to acknowledge a child or see a child? I mean, okay, so they've got perhaps an Insta or an X account, and do they just put their reels on that and just keep, promoting themselves through those platforms? I mean, what do they do in America that perhaps we can learn from?
Yeah, so I would say there's no minimum from a performance perspective. That's the beauty of our model here in college athletics, is that every coach is going to be looking for something different that's the best fit for their program. So depending on the sport, I always tell students, like, if you're a swimmer, go to the website of the schools that you're interested in and look at the results of maybe the last 4 or 5 meets. If you're swimming, freestyle or butterfly, look at what those times are in your events to figure out, are you within a reasonable amount of time that you could achieve at that level. If those times feel way out of reach, then maybe look at a few lower Division I programs in the rankings. So look at the top 100 programs in the US and see where the top program is, look at where the bottom program is, then go to Division II. And there's going to be overlap. So your Division II national champions are probably competing at the same times that some of your higher Division I programs are. So the division does not mean it's any less from a performance perspective by any means. But my best suggestion to any student that's interested in promoting themselves from a recruiting standpoint is every coach's email address is available on the university's athletic website. So if you're interested in attending Elizabeth University, you go to my university's website, you click on the athletic department, then you go to the staff directory, and they'll have all the coaches' email addresses listed by sport. I always tell students, do not email the head coaches. They are getting upwards of 500 to 600 emails a day, even at Division II schools. So imagine what the Division I head coaches are getting. A lot of the initial recruiting is done by assistant coaches, position coaches, other staff on the team. So I suggest making sure that you tailor each email to each university in their program. So if you just send a generic email out to 500 different universities, you're very unlikely to get a response. But if you send an email saying, hey, Coach Thompson, I really love what your swimming program is doing at Elizabeth University. Congrats on your win last week at this particular meet. I swim this event. I'm very interested in your university. I love where it's located. I love these things. I'm interested in this major, which I know is a really great program at your school. If you individualize an email like that, the staff is much more likely to read that and to take note of that, include your times or your events. If you're competing at a national level or even against nationally ranked, if you yourself are not ranked, note those competitions, win or lose, because it's going to give them an idea of who you're competing against or with or for. If you're playing for a notable team or club within your country, those are all important things. So we call it like a sports CV or a sports resume. So if you can include something like that, that you also have your grade point average, what year in school you are, when you anticipate enrolling at the university, all of those are best practices to promote yourself to schools. And if you don't hear back, check those recruiting calendars, see if it's a time of year that they're allowed to respond or not, but cast your net widely. Email and reach out to many schools at many different levels, especially now in the States with the transfer portal, which is a big part of students being able to transfer from university to university. We have seen a dip in the number of first-year student athletes being recruited out of high school, meaning coaches are first recruiting students at the college or university level and then recruiting the high school level. So if you have your eyes set on a very prestigious Division I program and you aren't hearing anything, that's why it's important to cast that wide net. Reach out to multiple Division I programs, Division II programs to get your foot in the door from a recruiting perspective.
And funny about that,
Super helpful, thank you.
And we have a template that we're going to share as part of this presentation. I think it's more important sometimes hearing from someone like Elizabeth who lives and breathes the Eligibility Center. So I have let her go overtime. So I'm going to cut through my session a little bit because you should know how to communicate with us. Everyone joining us today, I'm at the US Consulate in Melbourne. I look after people in Victoria, South Australia, Northern Territory and Tasmania, and then Cora does the rest. So we kind of have a 4-4 split, but Cora and I also support each other as well. I'm a former NCAA Division I athlete. If we're in a room together, I would ask you to guess. You are probably never going to guess, but I was a golfer. Ironically, that US college environment that you are considering to do, I think is one of the best options that you can consider, that you'll get an academic degree at the end of the process. So tonight we're talking all about NCAA. They're a 4-year institution, okay? But this may not be your best fit. Maybe it's NAIA, which is the small college specialist. Maybe it's the 2-year community college as well. Cora, if you've not met her yet, and I'll give her a chance just to come online for a minute. I'm going to have Cora introduce herself. And although is not an athlete, went to UNC and is a fellow American. So I'm going to let you quickly introduce yourself as well to the group, Cora, and then I will go through the short PowerPoint just to point out some things that we'd like families to be aware of.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. Yes, so hello, everyone. As Samantha said, my name is Cora. I work at the U.S. Consulate General in Sydney and cover the four, so New South Wales, Queensland, Western Australia, and ACT. Yeah, I went to UNC. So Robin, I saw your question about Duke. Well, they may not be my favorite team. That would be an example of a team that has both very good athletics and very good academics. But just one thing I wanted to note in general is there's kind of two pathways of looking at. There's some people who are looking to get into the highest level of competition for them, and they want to be on the best team for their athletic ability, and academics or the university academic part is not the most important concern for them, and others want to use their athletic ability to get into the best academic school that they can and or do it together. So there are different ways in terms of understanding the best fit and what is most important to the student when they're looking at where they want to go. But I will send it back to you, Samantha. Thank you.
Fantastic, Cora. And I think that's a nice segue into where to and what's next. Now, everyone joining us tonight hopefully know who Education USA is. We're a Department of State office. We're a free unbiased service. So we're never going to be able to find you that sports scholarship, but we very much can give you the tools and the skills and the confidence that you can navigate this pathway really clearly. And we often do our things in the 5 steps. Please know that today we've done college sports really well, but we really haven't got far out of the research your options and following those steps in regards to how you become eligible. One of the things that we also spoke about is that, are you going to use your academics? I think the beautiful things that the NCAA changed their guidance, and COVID is a bit of a blur, maybe 3 years ago when the NCAA dropped the need for a standardized test result. And I think it was perhaps 3 years ago, Elizabeth, it may have been 4. Time gap becomes very fast. You don't need that test as part of the eligibility criteria anymore, but you may want to consider that, particularly if you play a team sport and particularly if there's not a whole lot of scholarships given for that team, that if a coach can pull a bucket of money out of a different bucket, he can give it to you because of a merit academic scholarship somewhere else in the institution, then you become a whole lot more recruitable, okay? So you really need to think about where you're going to use that and how you're going to use that and how you're doing that. I think you probably know the reasons why you want to go to the US. It is probably reputation variety. You don't have to pick your major in day one. Ironically, you can pick your major up until the end of your second year. But if you can competitively play your sport and become very proficient at your sport, then I think that creates, a really good pathway and opportunity for you. Interestingly enough, tonight I'm coming to you from St. Charles, Illinois, and I'm with my college roommate who was on the volleyball team. So what you'll find is that alumni connection with the US institutions is incredibly strong and is incredibly deep, and it will be a lifelong connection, which is why a US opportunity, I think, is one of the best things you can consider. Cora and I also like to encourage and give you new knowledge and information. If you were sitting in a room with us tonight and you're a bunch of basketballers, I would ask you where Steph Curry went to school in the US. And you would all probably shout out, Samantha, he went to Davidson College. Now, he becomes a great advertisement for us, and you'll notice that the word college is in the institution name. As a general rule, if college is in the institution name, there's an institution you can go to where you just do your first degree, your first undergraduate 4-year degree. If you are looking at researching and the word university is in the name, often what that means is you can go there for your undergrad, master's, and PhD all at the same institution. Now, again, we just want this to be a learning phase as well, so that you walk away from today and go, wow, I've really learned something today, and this has been incredibly helpful. So when you start researching, it is okay not to know a college name. We would much prefer it that you didn't know a college name and put some things on your list. We also like bragging a little bit and sharing some wonderful stories. And Australia is very prevalent in NCAA student athletes. We're ranked 5th in the world outside of the US, Canada, UK, Germany, and then it tends to be us. I don't know if anyone is from Melbourne with us tonight, but Joe Maguire, he is at University of Ohio. They won the football grand prize last year, and he is their kicker. So again, there are wonderful stories and pathways. You probably have never heard of Stephanie Ratcliffe either. And again, it's about pathways. So she started at Harvard. She graduated from Harvard. She won the NCAA for hammer throw. It was the year of COVID, so she had some more eligibility left. She has just finished up graduating at the University of Georgia, and she is now a two-time NCAA hammer throw champion. Her Harvard throw also made her eligible to go to the Paris Olympics and represent Australia. So these are the very highest of the pinnacle, but you can also just be an incredibly good athlete and have a really incredible experience. So it is about finding the right fit, okay? It's about that academic fit, that athletic fit, and that financial fit. And the challenge with an athlete is you're doing those pieces in tandem, okay? Is that if your grades aren't strong enough and the school has a high academic rigor, and I saw one of I think someone on the call today said, but maybe it was Duke has a 2.6 GPA that they expect of their athletes. So you need to understand that the institutions have their own rigor. Okay, if you want to go to one of the Ivy League schools and you want to go to Harvard, just like Stephanie, then your academic rigor needs to be incredibly high. And Ivy League schools know what an ATAR is. So they're going to ask to see your ATAR result. But most other people are not going to ask what your ATAR is. They're going to want your transcripts from year 9 all the way through to year 12. So that's why being focused and going through becomes really important. It's also important to know that the process is different, okay? Please know that the steps are different. And when you apply to the US, you need to meet the academic rigor and you need to apply. And there is often some different steps involved in that. We won't unpack that tonight, but please continue to come to our sessions where we certainly unpack those in great detail. I think what's important is evaluating your academic perspective. You know, it's also finding where your good fit is. Your transcripts becomes a really important piece. Now, Elizabeth has said that the coaches don't see the transcripts of what you put in the NCAA portal. So it's really important that you perhaps give them 1 or 2 pages so you can give them a pre-read. You know, they want to know that you can academically, be really good at their institution. And often they can make you a better athlete. They can't make you a better student. So often it's about, what can you offer them and why do they want to recruit you? So please know that. But I got to tell you, the NCAA search tools becomes pivotal. If you're a visual person, then I think the map is a wonderful tool. But if you're a data-driven person, then maybe the directory on the left-hand side is the tool that you want to use when you're looking at those NCAA programs. Where else to go for information? Research your options. It's really important to understand where your information is coming from and don't believe your mate. Your mate often doesn't know the right thing and your mate is often not telling you the truth. And sometimes people give you the information on the best of intentions, but you need to check where that information is coming from. If you're going to the NCAA, then your Eligibility Center is the pivotal piece. They are the master. Cora and I can give you some guidance, but we are not the NCAA. If we have a question that we don't know the answer to, we're going to say, send it to the NCAA portal. Send it through the contact form. Elizabeth, I understand that if they send it through the contact form, is it matched to their student file for historical reference as well?
Our customer service team makes note of the communication with them in their record, yes.
So that becomes really important and really helpful to help you be recruited. Now, one of the things we didn't talk about tonight with Elizabeth, because she's not in the amateurism team, but that becomes still an important part and an important process. So if you're receiving money for your sport, you're playing tennis and you're getting prize pool, it's okay to get some prize pool money, but there are limits and what that is. And you need to be checking with the amateurism count of what that is allowable. If everyone on your soccer team is being given new boots, that's fine. But if only you're giving new boots, then that sounds like a sponsorship deal and that's a problem. So it becomes really important to also check with the amateurism as well. There are some great website search tools to help you find the right fit for your academics and also your athletics. And we just wanted to quickly review those and show them on screen with you tonight. And if you know what you want to study, then they saying niche.com could be a really good search tool to also help you identify sports. So I need to probably not validate this again, but please confirm what you hear and read. We often hear people saying, but Samantha, we were told that our friend did this. Samantha, this course was definitely a core course with the NCAA. And I'm like, well, I'm telling you it probably wasn't, and it's not on the form. And if you don't believe me, write to the NCAA Eligibility Center and they'll respond accordingly. And it's okay to ask questions. It's also important that you kind of research so that you're not wasting anyone's time, but that becomes really an important process and step. We ask you to engage with us. We will put the recording of this session up on our YouTube channel once it goes through the appropriate requirements and subtitling, but that's where there's a whole lot of programs and other resources here. We'll take down the old NCAA one that we've got up there still, Elizabeth, and we'll put up the new one. We also encourage you to listen to the podcast series during the July school holidays if you haven't already heard it. 5 episodes. It really will take you through the process of what it's like to be recruited. We interviewed Heather Marini when she used to be at Brown University. She has recently left Brown University and now she's back here in Australia at the NFL Academy up in Queensland. So we're still connected to Heather Marini and we love her a lot. But we are trying to unpack the process, and please know that the process can be a simplified step. You don't need organizations or agents or those kind of people to help you through the process, and keep on coming to sessions and re-listening to things, and you'll have a new confidence in regards to where you can go and how you can be recruited. Often finding the academic fit is just as important as the athletic fit. So, often we'll have people coming to country, and we also encourage you to visit and listen to those sessions as well. But we also send you to a whole lot of places of where we can send references and resources for you. Again, our website is going through a bit of a rebuild, but again, there's some good information there as well. We ask you, and if there's any students joining us tonight, I know you're rolling your eyes when we talk about Facebook, but Cora and I work for the US government. It's very hard for us to communicate with you in speed, so Facebook becomes the best way for it. If you didn't know about today's session, then perhaps you didn't engage with our Facebook really well because it's been on the event page for a little while, and we're also communicating with all your school staff and your career counselors in particular. If you don't think we're engaged with your school, invite them to engage with us. We are happy to support and help as much as we can. As I spoke about, we've really done a deep dive today with the NCAA, and Elizabeth, we absolutely appreciate your wisdom and guidance, but also know that the NCAA may not be your best fit. So please know that there are so many other options out there from a college sport perspective. Also know that it's about your sport. I just wanted to put California on here very quickly, especially from the community colleges, and especially if you're a baseball player tonight. A lot of baseball players go through California. They think they're their own country, so they are their own sports association for the community college level. So if you're looking and you can't find it under the NCAA and you're wondering why, that is why. We just wanted to share that really quickly with you. Most of the scholarships at even the community college level, they're only given at Division I and Division II as well. So it becomes really important. Now, that doesn't mean a Division III NCAA school is not going to be your best fit. Most of the academic rigorous institutions in the US are Division III. University of Chicago, one of the most academic schools in the US, is a Division III program. So again, it's not about Division III being the best or the weakest program. That's not what it's about. It's about where your best fit is. Also knowing that it's still incredibly competitive. If you're still trying to be recruited at Division III, you still need to be fine athlete. Don't think that you can be recruited if you're just playing a club sport. That's probably not good enough to be recruited. If you're a tennis player and you're a male and your UTR is not close to a 13, you may not get to a high-level Division I program. So it's about knowing where your talent and your skill will take you. If you're a male golfer and your handicap is 0, you're a fine golfer, but there are lots of golfers in America on 0. So often you need to be in the plus handicap range for NCAA Division I programs. If you're a female and your golf handicap is 2, you may well get to an NCAA Division I program. So again, it's going to dictate a little bit about your sport. If you are playing a sport that is measurable, it is much easier to be recruited. Your time is your time is your time, and coaches know exactly where you are, and you can't lie about that. So it is often a lot more challenging to be recruited as a team sport. And then we are highly encouraging you to become your best advertiser. It's never too early to start communicating with coaches from a year 9 level on. But as I said, they have rules about when they can actually return your phone calls. They have rules on when they can communicate with you. So I thought it was generally about the middle of year 11 is a sweet time in regards for Australia. But again, it's in that international student guide. It is there very clearly on when a coach can and can't talk to you and when they can start recruiting you significantly. Adding yourself to the coach's radar becomes important. Working with your current coach becomes important. Having a sport profile and a highlight video where you're out talking to camera and a coach can tell you're eloquent is really important. Having your coach talk about you to a future coach, I think, is pivotal, because a coach can talk to a coach even though they may not be able to talk to you until you get to the appropriate timelines. So that recommendation letter from a coach becomes a really important part of your profile. Again, everyone on the call tonight probably knows that Canva is created in Australia. What I really like about Canva is that you can put everything on one page. You need to make it incredibly simple for coaches. What I like about Canva is you can create a sports profile and you can turn it into a web link. So you can share a web link with the coach and then they can start actually reviewing you. You can actually put videos within Canva on the one page, and you can also update your school transcripts. So I have seen references and resumes. I've seen a lot of sports resumes. I've seen some really shite ones, but this is created by the best that we've seen that have come through our office. Now, you may hate it, and we're going to say don't use it, but you just need to think about how you're going to convey yourself to coaches and how they can learn about you as well. That's all we had to share tonight. And Elizabeth's right. It's about becoming your best advertiser. It's about working out who to communicate with. One of the things that we didn't address tonight is that most US college programs and their academic websites will say, if you want to come to our school, our expectation is you do a questionnaire first. So again, you need to be researching it and seeing what's there at the institutions. And we're going to probably just have a couple more questions in a couple moments before we end today's session. But are there any questions that have come through that we have not addressed, Cora? We've got it all covered?
Correct, so far.
Fantastic. I'm going to say, Elizabeth, we really appreciate you taking some time out of your early evening, getting later into the evening from your time. Are there any closing comments or questions or things that you didn't share that you said, oh, I should have said that?
I would just say on our website, when you register with us, you'll have the opportunity to sign up for our international newsletter. I strongly encourage that. That's the way to stay up to date. That's where you would find changes. So when you see those updates to our international guide and to course titles that might pertain to your territory, that's how you can find out about that information when those go out monthly and sometimes every other month, depending on the volume. And just be sure to follow along for all updates, but utilizing Education USA, Samantha and Cora and their team, they're phenomenal to work with, and they're very, very informed. I would argue probably some of the most informed in the world, just because of the length of time that they have been doing this and their dedication to helping students from Australia. So you have a really great tool in them, and I would encourage you to reach out and utilize them to kind of help navigate this process, because as Samantha mentioned, it's overwhelming for all like future students going into college. Like as a first generation, I can tell you remembering being overwhelmed at what school and what program and what taking visits and choosing the part of the country that was the best fit. So I grew up in large cities all across the US, and some of the schools that I thought were going to be top programs for me when I visited were in very rural parts of the country where there wasn't great cell phone signal and there wasn't anything to do off of campus. There were no malls or shopping centers or city life. And I knew because of that visit, that was not the right fit fit for me. So I can't encourage you enough, because we've, heard stories of students that maybe saw this program and was like, oh, this is a huge program, I want to go there. And it's in the middle of a city where maybe there was, some activities around campus that was a big culture shock to them that made it hard for them to fit in there. And they ended up leaving or going back home or choosing a different school. So utilize virtual tours, utilize their International Student Services Center to try to connect with someone from your part of the world as a student or a student athlete. And then once you're looking to get to campus, create yourself a group outside of just your team. So you're going to be with those individuals a lot, and it's important to build friendships outside of just your sporting team to ensure that you have that time to get away from the sport, that you have that kind of mental break in things to where you can talk to other individuals. So looking to see what communities are available within the towns that those campuses are located, and through their International Student Services Center to help connect and find ways to remind you of home, depending on, how far away you're traveling, whether you're going to California, which is probably arguably that in Hawaii, the closest NCAA schools to those in Australia, or if you're going somewhere further like Indianapolis or Chicago or New York, that's going to be a lot further away from home. And again, temperature wise, culturally, you might see a lot of differences that you're going to desire those things that remind you of home. So be sure to utilize all of those things to choose the school that is the best fit for you, because you're potentially going to be there for 4 or 5 years and you want it to be a good experience.
And then you go, how do I find the best fit? Keep on coming to sessions that Cora and I run. We run them every sort of 6 to 8 weeks. Please stay connected with us. On that note, Elizabeth, thanks for joining us tonight. Cora, thanks for joining us as well. To everyone that is enjoying school holidays, do enjoy your school holiday break, and we will see you in the next term of school. Thanks, everyone.